Hello! Welcome to another episode of Declassify. In fact, it's already the second last one for this year. I'm so excited for our guest today, so I'm just going to jump straight into introducing her because I'm joined by one of the most passionate people that I know, and I'm sure some of you out there know her as well, and it's Megan Steller. Megan is an artist manager, a writer, speaker, and producer based in Melbourne, and she is passionate about working with emerging artists and seasoned performers to help create fulfilling, diverse, and creatively empowering careers in the classical music sector. She's also an artist manager, and Megan has worked with companies such as Intermusica in the UK and at Patrick Togher Artists Management Group in Australia. She's also a journalist, having published in Limelight Magazine and The Age and The Music, and notably, she started something that had a great impact on my own undergrad self, and it was Rehearsal Magazine. And aside from that, she's worked with so many other organisations that I know if I start listing them, I'll get them wrong. So welcome on board, Megan.
Thank you.
Oh, you're definitely welcome. And I probably did a really bad job of introducing you, and as my intro suggests, I can't even begin to list all the groups you've worked with or you've even started up yourself. So I have to really ask, and I think it'll be really interesting for people, what was it that drew you into this complex, vibrant world of classical music?
Absolutely. It's a bit curly, I guess, when I think about it laid out. I started playing piano when I was pretty little, about 4, and I was really bad. And my dad was taking me, he's kind of the musician in the family, and he was taking me, and we got to this point where I was not doing well, and the teacher said, like, this might not be for her. And so my mum, the accountant, stepped in and said, I'm taking over. I'll take you to lessons now. And it kind of took off from there. And I played pretty solidly from then until 5 years ago. So I went to university and did piano, and I was still pretty bad then, to be perfectly honest. But I persisted quite hard. I was really passionate about music and being part of the industry. I started exploring opera in second year uni and got really invested in that for whatever reason. I marched up to the repetiteur at uni who ran the opera ensemble and said, I want to be part of it. You don't have a pianist, and I could be that pianist. And I think she just probably was shocked, and she was like, okay. Because luckily I didn't have to audition, because I think if I auditioned it wouldn't have gone so well. But I basically spent the rest of my time at university playing for singers and really getting myself into the repertoire of opera. And from kind of around the same time, I suppose, is when I started to discover opera, I started really wanting to write. And some of that stemmed from needing to figure out a backup plan, I guess. I was becoming very aware that playing wasn't for me, for many reasons, I suppose. Serious performance anxiety and an inability to sit at the keyboard long enough to practice anything efficiently. And so writing was something I was really interested in. I've always been a big book lover, and I emailed Limelight and asked for an internship and got one, which was so fortunate. I was extremely lucky. And I worked with Maxim Boone, who has since become a colleague and friend. And I wrote news for him for the website for about 6 months. And that kind of led to me getting a job in communications at Melbourne Opera Trust out of uni, or just before I finished, which was, again, really lucky. And yeah, that was the beginning of my admin career, I suppose. And it's kind of gone from there.
And then was there something when you were working at the Opera Trust that compelled you to start your own publication, Rehearsal Magazine?
Yeah, probably. I think I started Rehearsal before I started at Melba. But I could be, yeah, I'm sure that's true. you might have to fact check me. But I think Rehearsal came first. And that was a really, that was such a a fabulous space for me to just throw ideas around and kind of, throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. And I got to, it was supposed to be a blog that I could just write my feelings on and have a few friends kind of join me and talk about their own experiences. And then it grew from there in a way that I really didn't expect, and was very, very exciting. And I think the editing experience I got from there, from running Rehearsal Magazine, that really helped with Melba, where I was producing the magazine. They do a really wonderful kind of broadsheet magazine, and it's 12 pages, I think, kind of front and back, and it's big because it's a broadsheet, and so that's a lot of space to fill, and yeah, that was an amazing experience.
I think I remember submitting something into rehearsal back when it was first starting, when you could submit a question and then you had a panel of people from the industry answer them. And I thought that was so cool, particularly for young musicians to engage through the platform that you had created.
Yeah, it seemed really important. And I think I think it still is really important, that idea of being able to access knowledge and share resources with people who've done it, or who are slightly further ahead than you, or who are years and years, decades further ahead than you in career building. I don't think there's enough of that. And that was my first attempt at trying to bring people together in that way.
Well, I think it did work because before, I was in my undergrad when rehearsal became a thing, and before that, I remember feeling like the community as a whole wasn't that connected, particularly between states, because it felt like a really defined community set in Sydney or Melbourne or in Brisbane, etc. But because of rehearsal, I felt like there was an avenue to talk to people working down in Melbourne and beyond that. And that seemed, for someone who was just starting out in their first and second year at a conservatorium, as something prior to that, it was something that was inaccessible until you had provided that. So thank you.
Oh, wow. Oh my goodness, that's so lovely. That's so heartening. It was something that was a really massive part of my life, and I'm proud of, and I want to get back to at some point. And it's one of those things that work gets in the way and life gets in the way, and it kind of fell to the bottom of the pile. But it definitely, I think, solidified my values, I guess, without sounding too wishy-washy. It made me realize it made me realize how much I need and value community in any facet of life, but especially in the arts, which can seem so fragmented and continues to be fragmented by a whole suite of things. Right now, the virus that has really, it's taken away a lot of inbuilt community, rehearsals, periods, and just the feeling of family in a space. And I think that's what people are really craving right now, other than missing the fact that they can't be on stage. I think that the loss of community is one of the hardest things to deal with right now. And rehearsal and the process behind building it really taught me that, I think, in a much more solid way.
That's really beautiful, because it's true. Musicians make music together. Like, even if you're a soloist, you're going to be making music generally with other people.
Yeah, or you're playing for a group of people. Like, it's bodies in a room that make the experience what we all love on every kind of, wherever you sit, if you're backstage or if you're in the you do the lighting or the sound. Like, it's being part of that, sitting in the dark and feeling something, to to borrow that phrase. There's something, so even if you are alone on stage, you're not alone. Mm-hmm. And in some way, Zoom allows us a little bit of that. If you put your performance from your lounge room on stage, on Facebook or on YouTube, we are able to create community online, but it's never going to feel the same. There's something about the feeling of sitting in a crowd, and as you know, I haven't been on stage for a very long time. I've never felt comfortable on stage, but I miss sitting in the hall, or hall is not the right word. I miss sitting anywhere with a group of people and experiencing something together.
Yes, it is very different when you're alone by yourself listening to a concert in your pajamas. Somehow I feel rude, even though I'm totally comfortable. I feel like I'm being disrespectful that I'm just like in my bed watching these musicians live stream their performance. And then also
and they're in a tux, like
yeah, exactly. They're properly in black.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? And I think that's part of something that we'll be grappling with for a long time now, because of everything that's happened, but also because of accessibility. I think this has opened up a lot of opportunities to make performances more accessible to a larger group of people. And within that context, I think building experiences that aren't pretending to be live when they're not live. I think that's something we're not quite there yet, but it's something really on people's minds. And something I'm really interested in watching, you know, just from an audience perspective. I'm so excited to see what happens in that space, because I think there is real value in being able to watch something from your home, wherever you may be. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what comes of
it
this.
does increase the accessibility, as you say, because now you worry a little bit less about being able to make it to a physical venue, especially if it's a big concert hall. It's always in the city, or you know, sometimes just being able to afford a ticket is very difficult.
Absolutely. I think there are so many things that are prohibitive about putting on a performance of any sort. And opera more than many, because it is expensive and it does require, or the way we think about it in many contexts, it requires, there are real parameters around what it means to put on an opera, if you will. And I think that means that like there are so many different people that we are excluding without realizing it or without purposefully doing it from that experience. And so I do think that there is a real value in carrying on exploring the possibilities of remote performances, I guess, well into the future, when we can actually go back at full capacity to a theatre.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it'll be so valuable. And now I hope that it'll give people time to think about how to approach these different aspects of music and sharing experiences. So I do really hope that digital platforms kind of become a permanent thing. They have, in the sense that, you know, the Met Opera has this huge online archive that people can access via subscription services, or really big orchestras like the Berlin Philharmonic. So I really do think it's becoming a part of the culture. For example, even Melbourne has its own digital concert hall.
Yeah, it is. And I hope there is. I think both experiences can work side by side, the digital experience and the in-person live experience. And I think it'll be, I think that's a big, I don't know, it's a question of how can both exist together without either one taking over, you know, from the other. And that's a really tricky question, because you don't want to lose audience members from the live perspective to a digital experience, but in the same token, you don't want to kind of have handed people who can't get into a theatre generally this extraordinary artistic experience to then take it away, because suddenly all of us who have the privilege of being able to get into those spaces can again. You know, it's something I'm thinking about a lot, and it's not something that there are probably people smarter than me that know the answers, but it is something that I think is really interesting and worth talking about. There's a good dialogue to be had.
Definitely. So kind of tying all of this together and all of your experience on and backstage from rehearsal through to your love of opera, how did that lead you to becoming an agent both in Australia and then in the UK for the world of opera?
Yeah, okay. It's again a little curly. Everything's been a little curly in my very short time as a professional something in the sector. Whatever that is, I'm not sure yet. I haven't really figured it out. But from Melbourne, I suppose that's kind of where I left things off. From there, I got a job in administration for Orchestra Victoria, who are also, I suppose, connected to opera in a really significant way, being Victoria's collaborator with Opera Australia. And so that was a really exciting opportunity, again, to kind of get into the theatre and experience some of that from behind the scenes. I'd never walked through the art centre and seen where the band perform from, before I worked at Orchestra Victoria. And that was really exciting. And because then you see all the odd bits and bobs that make a set, that make the set that is extraordinary from the front of house, and these incredible people who work behind the scenes building this world, I guess. And it all starts out as planks and and all kinds of bizarre contraptions. And so when you walk through backstage, a darkened, the back of the stage, it was a really extraordinary experience. I think there's something very magical about that. I'm a romantic, so I loved that. And that was really wonderful. I got a lot out of that, and that taught me lots of useful administration skills. Scheduling and yes. and all that. How to use Excel and how to be on time and all of those kinds of things that you don't know until you have to do it. So that was really wonderful. And while I was on education tour with OV, I got a call from Patrick Togher, the wonderful artist manager, and he said, I've put a job ad up on Facebook, and I'd like you to think about it. And I thought about it for 2 minutes probably, and then I decided I'd say yes. I think I drew it out. I think I played a bit hard to get, but I knew that that's what I wanted. But I knew that was a really wonderful offer, and I went up to Sydney to meet him and to figure out what it meant to be an artist manager, because it wasn't something I'd considered at all. And yeah, I just kind of dove in head first, and it was a really fabulous year of it was hard. It was really hard. There are lots of things about being a manager, an artist manager, that again you don't know until you start, and you don't know how to solve problems until you're thrust into them, and you have to kind of figure your way out. It's a bit of a puzzle, and it is quite tricky, and you have to be very calm in situations that would usually kind of drive you a bit wild. So it teaches you a lot of lessons very quickly. It certainly taught me a lot of lessons very quickly, and I did that for a year and a half, and happened to go to the UK on holiday, and met with the wonderful people at Intermusica, and they offered me a job. So I moved over to the UK quite quickly, which was also never part of the plan, but turned out to be a really exciting part of the plan, and I was there for 4 months before I came home because of coronavirus.
Oh dear. It's rather depressing how this has put a stop on everything, but I suppose it's a great equalizer in that it's put a stop to every single person's possible plans.
Absolutely. And lots of lessons learned out of it's one of those things, right? You can't expect everything to go how you want it to go, or how you plan it to go. And I think well, I certainly learned this the hard way this year. Being resilient and bouncing back that's what proves your strength and how well you'll do into the future. And it took me quite a long time to get to that point. This time around, I've had a lot of stuff. I've failed a lot, but this felt hard because you can't point at yourself and say, oh, okay, you did this, which is easier, I think, and has certainly been easier for me. If I can look at myself in the mirror and say, like, that was you, so fix it, much easier. And this one was kind of like, well, wrong place, wrong time, but you're in this with absolutely everybody else. So puzzle your way out.
That's an excellent message for people to hear, because we're all getting a little bit fatigued and somehow disheartened, but we are in it with everybody. I should ask, though, with both the agencies in Australia and in the UK, were you working predominantly with opera in terms of the artists you were representing?
Yeah, Australia, I was working with some instrumentalists and some conductors as well. And I suppose that's the difference between the two has to do with how the industry works more generally. Like in this region, there are less agents in Australia, and the work is just a little broader, which is fantastic. I really missed working with conductors when I moved to the UK, and then when I moved to the UK, it's much more segmented, I suppose. You work in a department that is specifically for XYZ. So I moved into the vocal and opera division of Intermusica, and so everything, at least in my portfolio, was very focused on singers.
So I do have to ask this because there are people listening who don't actually realise that in the classical music world we have agents, and it's something a lot of people will associate with modelling or acting or the film industry. So what does a classical music agent do?
Yeah, good question. It varies, I think, depending on what the artist needs. Predominantly, though, it's the things, I suppose, that you would expect: some contract negotiation, looking after the financial side of things, like the business administrative side of things, I suppose, is the easiest way to explain it. So I can only speak from my experience, and other agents will probably tell you different, or may have variations on this. But I guess a day looks like managing a diary, so making sure that I know exactly where the artist needs to be and like how they need to get there, and all of the you have the train tickets and the plane tickets and and the scheduling, and so I'm really making sure that I'm equipping the artist as best as I possibly can with what they need for a project or for a period of time. Of course, opera contracts are slightly different to like an instrumentalist or even a conductor's performance if it's not specifically an opera conductor, because they're much longer. You have a much longer rehearsal and performance period. So, they can be huge, more like, I guess, filming a television pilot or something. You might have a 2-week rehearsal period, and then performances might go, like, they might stretch over a month. And that's, I guess, completely different to, say, a violin soloist who turns up the day before, has 2 calls in a day, has a sound check the day after, and then performs, and then that's the project over. So yeah, a bit of difference in terms of managing a diary. Working with a conductor who does like a bit of a mix, like symphonic and opera, and maybe some other additional projects. That can be like the diary looks a bit trickier. Because there are things that overlap, and there are often more flights and trains and buses, and the logistics are a little more challenging. And then when it's a singer, it's about getting them to the place that they need to be, and then they stay there for 2 months, and you say, oh, fabulous, I'll go and work on something else. They're safe wherever they need to be, and so yeah, a lot of diary management, scheduling. Then the contract side of things, which is a big part, and I guess it's a really challenging part for freelancers and for all artists. You're up against a lot when you read a contract, when you negotiate a contract. There are lots of different factors that you need to think about, not least kind of the financial side of things, and what it means for a company to be offering a certain dollar amount. So there's lots kind of to take in and consider when you're negotiating a contract, and it's something that, again, it feels more challenging, I suppose, if you're a freelance artist, having to do that yourself. So that's something that an agent can do and alleviate. And then there's the total other side of things, the more artistic side of things, which it really depends on the artist specifically. But in opera, there are lots of things that agents do in terms of assisting with future repertoire choices. And look, the person doing the singing has the instrument inside them, so they know best. And I really believe that. Like, I always defer back to how the artist feels and whether they feel confident in a role or singing in a certain way or participating in a certain production. But there are things that you learn about the repertoire, I suppose, that you can then offer to the artist to assist them in saying, okay, we're here now. Where are we going to be in 5 years, 10 years? Like, what are the steps that we can take to get you singing Wagner in a decade? Or that's just a very kind of random example, but there are things that you can do and there are steps that you can take. So yeah, it's about getting all the puzzle pieces, I suppose.
For our first intermission is a work chosen by Megan, and this is performed by the wonderful Australian singer, songwriter and composer Kate Miller-Heidke and composer Ian Grandage. This is an excerpt from the acoustic version of Where, from the opera The Rabbits, composed by Miller-Heidke, Grandage and Lally Katz.
And the wind blows empty across the plains. I have walked these plains for the whole memory of my soul. And the soul of my mothers, and the soul of my father's fathers. We have been the life of these plains, ghosts on these plains. Grass once green, there were plants in our hands. The time seems so long ago now. Where is the rich dark earth, brown and moist? Where is the smell of rain dripping from gum trees? Everything familiar is gone everything I counted on. I can't run, I can't swim away from this land. Where is the rich, dark earth, brown and
It's really interesting that you have a say, like a big say in the repertoire choice, because I always wondered how that works, because I know that agents also have quite a deal of like a sense of responsibility when it comes to organizing auditions for different shows and casting, which involves, you know, possibly for an artist repertoire they haven't considered yet.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important, and it's something that like I'm still at the beginning end, the beginning of my career as a manager, and I think I have a really good kind of understanding of repertoire, but it's something that is you constantly have to be learning, and I am constantly upskilling, I suppose, listening to recordings and using the Wikipedia pages to figure out who sings what and what kind of voice is it and what color is it, and you know who sang in the original cast, and so like you know what was their trajectory, and doing all of that kind of personal development work, and it just gives you this really nice overview where you can say maybe this might work for this person. You know, there's no one path. If there was one path, then I would be redundant. and casting directors would be redundant, because you'd know exactly who was going to be able to sing this at this point, you know? And because that's not the case, I think that's what makes the job so fun.
Yeah, and then there's great diversity with each of the artists that you get to work with, and they're very different career paths. And so I've always wondered, how does the casting side of things work in opera? Like, a lot of other things we're similarly accustomed to seeing really big names, so I often wonder how young people get casted into these big or these new roles, particularly with larger opera companies.
Yeah, it's really tricky, to be perfectly honest. It's really tricky, and again, there's no prescription. A lot of it comes down to the casting director or the artistic director, and that's part of that's one of the huge challenges of being a freelance singer, because you're one person, and you're going up against the whim of another. You're very aware of, like, you know, panels and things, like from all kinds of perspectives, like not just auditioning, but you know, sending in a grant application. The person on the panel might absolutely adore your work, but they, like, I don't know, got their hand caught in the car window coming in, and now they're angry and they couldn't care less about what you do. It doesn't matter how good you are. Like, it's really tricky. It's really tricky. I guess there are ways of moving forward as a young artist that are very well known, like auditioning and getting into a young artist program. And there are lots of different versions of young artist programs. There are some really, really huge ones that feed into companies, like the Metropolitan Opera have an extraordinary program, as do the Royal Opera House in the UK, in London, the Yetta Park Young Artist Program, and they allow young artists stage time on, like, you know, what is a world-class stage. And then there are smaller programs in houses across Germany, or most have a young artist program, and often people will go over to Germany and sing as part of the young artist program and then become full-time singers there. So that's, you know, that's a path. Here in Australia, there are young artist programs at the state companies. There is a young artist program at Opera Australia, but it's yes, it exists in principle, but it's not necessarily like the progression is not as clear. I mean, the progression is not as clear in Australia, generally by virtue of the fact that there aren't as many stages as there are in Europe, which is a challenge for young singers. It really is. But and so so that's one possibility, getting through a young artist program, and then another is going down the competition route, and really what that does, that's challenging across the board for all young performers, and it's not something that I feel super passionately about, to be perfectly honest, but it is a good way of getting yourself known in the circuits, because often the people who actually sit on the panel are the ones doing the hiring in companies. So it's a good way to get your face and your voice in front of some interesting people who might keep you in mind for future roles. And then the other way is just doing the audition circuit. And that again is a real challenge. It's hard to get auditions. And once you're in there, it's hard to, because opera is planned so far in advance, it's tricky to time it. You have to time it quite well. A lot of singers go through choruses of companies, and that's another way that it's one of those things that a lot of singers think, like, will I get stuck in a chorus? And the answer is sometimes yes.
Yeah, and it's just really difficult to shift from these spots or to avoid getting somehow pigeonholed. And as you said, there are very few stages, and in general across the world there are very few roles, and a few companies that can afford to have a rich environment that can even begin to support young people coming up through this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of it as well is the fact that, and I'm sure we were going to come to this anyway, but the fact that so many of the operas that are put on are the same ones year on year. And so they usually require very similar casts year on year. And so if your voice isn't exactly what the person who sang it last year's, there are real challenges around fitting into a pre-existing mold in opera, which are similar across the board in many forms. But yeah, it is really prevalent in opera because it's this old thing, that we've been doing for bloody ages, and we expect some casting directors remember this recording from the 60s and they want everything to sound like that, and so there's it's really challenging. And then you might have quite an unusual voice. You might be a countertenor or a contralto, voices that are extraordinary and so usable in the right operas, but that opera may never be put on. You're up against a lot as a young singer, and then you're up against a lot as an any age singer, but yeah, it is hard to break through at the beginning, really hard.
And do you think that this idea of programming the same things, for example, I would say the most popular things would be all the Mozart operas, then Puccini, and probably Verdi's operas are quite popular in general. Do you think that narrows the public perception of what opera has to offer, because we constantly recycle the same set of pieces, which unfortunately I don't know if the musicians want to be always singing the same pieces of music all the time either over a 20-year period of their career.
Yeah, totally. I think absolutely it stifles creativity. It puts singers in a box. I think singers have so much to offer. And there are some singers who would happily sing Violetta every day for the rest of their lives, and that's totally fine. There are musicians who would be happy playing Beethoven 1 for the rest of their lives. That's fine and that's useful and great. But I think I think we shoot ourselves in the foot a little bit, getting stuck in this cycle of, if we only do Puccini and Mozart every single year, it means young singers are only being taught to sing Puccini and Mozart, and we feed this toxic is the wrong word, but this really boring cycle of just creating the same thing over and over again, and telling ourselves that this is what audiences want to hear.
I actually don't think that's necessarily true, that audiences
want
to hear that, because, for example, Opera Australia, for the first time I think in a decade, they commissioned that brand new work by Elena Castrén, and they did really well in terms of ticket sales. Lots of people wanted to see this new work. So
absolutely. That's a big, it's a big problem without wanting to speak out of turn towards Opera Australia, because like, this is tricky. You know, they have a lot of boxes to tick, but I think something that has become obvious recently is the fact that there is no, or there may be a loyal fan base, but it's small, and because so much of the ticket sales relied upon tourists who were coming in, and it was the best thing ever to go and see Traviata on the harbour. Like, what an amazing experience. I can't question that. That is a fabulous experience, but you only want it once.
That's true.
And I think something that we can learn from the smaller companies is that if you take them with you on a journey, you know, you really look after a group of people. They'll go with you as you try new things, and I think that's like that's going to be the real saving grace of our state companies. The fact that they have people who really want to turn up, they want to support the arts, they want to support the form, and they're willing to be taken on a journey, and they want to hear something new. They want to experience something new. And so opera doesn't have to be this static art form, because it shouldn't be just like you see it once and then you never want to see it again. I'm happy to see Carmen 7 times, but not if it's the same every single. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Sometimes the staging is like reused and they use the same costumes again, and I kind of understand why, because of, quite frankly, the burden of making all that financially is enormous. So I know why they've done that. But when you see Carmen back to back over a 5-year period every single year for that 5 years, it's a bit much.
And if we see Carmen doing the same thing about maybe 5-6 years ago, the Royal Opera House did this performance of Lucia de Lammermoor, and it kind of showed that there's an extraordinary mad scene that is, whatever you think of opera and whatever you think of this opera in particular, you can't question the how extraordinary it is to be in a theatre and hear a singer who just totally nails that aria. Like, there's nothing better than that. You know, take or leave the rest of it, but wow, that moment is just amazing. And they did this, like, you know, it can be quite boring, that opera, like it's quite long, and you know, you can do it in the kind of traditional setting, and it's quite boring. But in London, a female director flipped it and made it about Lucia herself, which makes a lot of sense considering she is the title role. But, you know, as many operas are, they're very much about the male perspective. But this director showed you, while other things were happening, showed you Lucia's story all the way through this production. And like, that's good operatic storytelling in my mind, because it's taking something that we know and that can be a bit tired and that isn't necessarily facing up to 21st century values and understandings. And like, you know, if you put 2020 goggles on Lucia right now, it's not passing any tests. But if you make it so that it does, you've suddenly got this living, breathing piece of theatre that makes a lot of sense right now. And that's the point, right?
Yes, exactly. And particularly like in context with what you're saying about having a female director and kind of changing the perspective of storytelling, it's quite topical, because in Australia itself, I mean, they just commissioned a report, I think, run by Kat Hope, Sally Blackwood and Lisa Lim, all about female narratives in opera. And because we're in the habit of recycling the same works, we see the same narratives in regard to how women are treated and how their narrative is presented, as well as some very recent questionable costume design regarding people of color on stage, because opera has kind of made it acceptable for that to be put on stage, because they purport this idea of being traditional and lavish and that this is the experience that the audience wants. Whereas I think if they keep persisting in that direction, there will be a point where they no longer feel relevant.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that point was like way back there. Like they passed
Yes.
that point. Like seriously, you know,
Yeah.
we passed that point 20 years ago. And a lot of what has happened in opera should never have happened. But especially now, like there is just no excuse for it anymore. Really, there's no excuse for it. And I really think like if you're struggling to see how to update an opera, you're bad at your job. Like, or you need additional help. Like call somebody who is able to speak with empathy and eloquence on the topics that you need help with. Like if you are a male director and you're struggling to figure out how this scene should work with a 2020 lens, call a woman. Like call a female director that you like and or admire or know, whatever, it doesn't matter. Call somebody and ask for help. I think, I mean, this kind of reminds me of what we were talking about before, and this fact that resource sharing is not common enough. I think that's a big failing of the sector. It's just we feel very siloed within our productions or companies or you know, whatever kind of setting you're in, where in fact I think it should be normal for people to jump on the phone, especially now, jump on Zoom. There's no excuse for it anymore, I don't think. Just talk to people, engage in dialogue, and yeah, or put something else on.
Yes, something different.
Yeah, I really struggle with this idea that like, oh, there's nothing we can do because opera is opera, and we do it how it was done when it was first premiered in 1874. Like, no, come on.
I mean, I don't think they would even be doing it the way it actually was done in 1874, right? Because we have no idea of exactly what that would have been like.
Exactly. And we've got like amazing comfortable chairs now, and like you know, we can put on stuff that has like the background is all digital. So why do you also put on something that is incredibly, like, yeah, if you can put a digital background onto your opera, like if you have that skill or you have that kind of that level of resource to do something as technologically advanced as that, then there's no excuse for perpetuating a problematic storyline or you know, or a problematic costume. There's just no excuse for it, really. Like, exactly. Get with the program.
For our second intermission is another selection by Megan, this one being one of her favourites, and this is performed by opera extraordinaire Rhiannon Giddens. This piece, Tree on the Mountains, is from the opera Susanna, composed by Carlisle Floyd.
Trees on the mountains are cold and bare. The summer just vanished and left them there, like a false-hearted lover, just like my own, who made me love him, then left me alone. The coals on the hearth have turned grey and sick. The blue flame just vanished and left them there, like a false-hearted lover, just like my own, who made me love him, then left me alone. Come back, oh summer, come back, blue flame. My heart once warm in my baby name. Come back, oh lover, if just for a day. Turn bleak December once more into May. a star to show me the way. Your light in my heart, come back, my lover, and faint star.
It's really weird. It's like operas are trying to maintain this idea of being really lavish opera houses. So, I mean, I think they do really want to uphold that image. But very recently, if you just take a quick look into the news, the companies that are truly suffering a lot in the arts and within classical music due to the pandemic, and, you know, will probably extend into post-pandemic, are the Met Opera and Opera Australia. Unfortunately, both of them letting their orchestra go immediately, whereas, you know, other orchestras that are only orchestras haven't necessarily had to do that yet. And both of those companies are selling property, so they're really struggling. I think both, as you mentioned before, the tourism aspect, but they are really struggling to maintain a large enough local audience because perhaps they're not in touch with them.
Yeah, and it's really heartbreaking. It's and not in the sense that here's an institution that, you know, we should protect until our dying breath, but in the sense that what is heartbreaking about it for me personally, and I can only speak for myself, is this idea that, like, we won't learn from this experience, and we'll go back to, like, we'll try and recuperate the money that we've lost and builds back what was there, rather than saying, what can we do differently? What can we do that's new? What can we do to shake things up? Because and this is the problem with a lot of institutional places and things and people that are, like, really embedded in you know, places that have massive government support and you know, all of that kind of thing, is the fact that they, like, it's more or less working. And so if it ain't broke, you know, and actually, like, it is broke. And not in the financial sense, though it may be that too. But I think opera needs a real shake-up, because we're ready for something new. And there are young people that value the form and that want to see it break boundaries. We want to see new stuff, and we want to see interesting people making work. I want to see people my age composing and directing and performing. Like, I think it's a big mind frame shift that is going to be slow, but is, I really, really hope that it's on the cards.
Oh gosh, I hope so too, because before you mentioned 1874, and those young composers were writing the operas that we're still performing today. So if they really want to go back to the roots of traditional opera, then that's definitely available as an option to work with the local living people.
Hilarious. That's so true. That's so true. And, like, wouldn't it be nice to have the composer in the room saying, like, oh, actually, no, that sounds weird. Let's just do that again.
Yeah.
There's something so extraordinary.
Oh gosh. I mean, I have recently seen brand new operas from Australian composers, but the burden falls on really small companies and experimental groups or ensembles that just get together for this commission and then they disband afterwards.
Totally. But, like, more power to those companies. I am so grateful for places like Sydney Chamber Opera. Like, I only wish that I could get up there more often to see what they're doing, because that's so important. It's so important. And we take it for granted. I think this fact that, like, somebody's going to do it, and it takes a lot of resources from those small companies to put something on of the scale that they put it on at. And yeah, I hope people really come out of this and can go back to theatres and support the local experimental new works, because they don't survive if we don't, and that's what we need. that's really what we need right now.
Oh, I love them because I think they tell stories. For example, I think the last one I would have seen was Lucinda. No, I've forgotten the
Yeah,
name of the opera.
Oscar and Lucinda.
Yes, Oscar and Lucinda by Elliot Geiger. And he was
Yeah.
he was just lurking in the back during the premiere. He was so sweet. But the thing is that he had, and that opera company gave him the chance to tell this very intricate, diverse Australian story. And all these people who came to that performance, so many of them were not classical musicians or people who would generally go to opera. They came because they had read that book when they were studying the HSC like 20 or 30 years ago, and they heard about the opera, and Carriage Works is probably the best venue, and the tickets weren't particularly expensive. I think it was $35, which is super affordable, right, to go to a brand new opera. And there was this amazement that you could meet, at least talking to the people around me, that you could actually meet the man who wrote the music, because that seems so impossible because we generally hear Mozart.
I mean, it's amazing that the vibe in the room was so electric that it's kind of like when we're still getting like firsts of people, you know, in leadership positions or whatever, and you just think, oh God, really? Like, we shouldn't be celebrating that. Like, we should be like, that's the 107th, like old news. Like that, we take that for granted. Like, it should be taken for granted that sometimes you go and hear something and the composer will be in the bar afterwards, you know, and you can talk to them, and it's something that you can go up and say, wow, that moved me, or like, oh, I got shivers in this bit, and like it's something that I think theatre does really well, kind of, you know, plays. And you can feel that there's something very electric about that experience, and that's what I want to see in opera. I want to cry, like I really do, or I want to belly laugh, like, and there are so few opportunities to do those things when you sit in the dark and like, you know, fall asleep during the fourth massive aria. And I love opera. Like I'll go to opera 6 times a week some weeks, and I crave that. I keep going because I want someone to just punch me in the gut and make me feel anything, to be honest. Just make me feel, you know, I don't want to sit and just think about dinner later, or like taxes, or like doom. I want to feel.
And like, that is the real experience of art, to feel something, even if you hate some of it, or, you know, sometimes you feel rage. It's better than sometimes me going to an orchestral performance, and I love orchestral music. My mind just ends up wandering through Sibelius Symphony No. 3 because it's the third time it's been programmed that year. And, you know, to make a bit of a weird segue from Sibelius back to your idea of agency and being an agent, I think what's really important, and you mentioned it earlier, is that you mentioned the word freelancer. And I think a lot of people don't realize that by the point you actually have an agent, you're still a freelancer. And a lot of the time, if you're a performing musician, the chances are is that you're always going to be a freelancer. And the people I know that aren't freelancers are full-time orchestral members. So I thought it was really important that you mentioned them, because freelancers are most classical musicians.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of things that are great about being a freelancer, and there are a lot of really, really tough things about being one. And I think to, again, press on resource sharing, I think that is the most valuable thing to nurture, even if it's just within your set of friends in the industry. Being able to call someone and say, oh, I got this contract, can you read it over? Or like, you know, I need help with this part. Or like, I think there's a real, you have to be quite stoic. I think there's or at least there is a feeling like you have to be this kind of unbreakable musician, not necessarily in like your life outside of playing, but in your professional worlds, you have to like never present as injured, and never say like, I'm actually just not feeling it today. You know, I can't rehearse today because I feel slightly under the weather, like this, or like I'm really sure this is a technical bit. And I'd love to just play it for you. Like I feel like we kind of get out of the emerging phase, and I'm doing quotations for emerging because that's a whole another kettle of fish that we can delve into another time. But once you leave that and become emerged, if you will, you suddenly don't need help anymore as a musician. And the truth is that you always should be improving, and it's okay to need help in every single facet of your professional life. And that's again, that'll be a big mind frame shift. But I hope that that's something we can aim for, and I think, or at least I hope, with the change in attitudes around mental health in young people, in you know, the current kind of university students, I guess. My hope is that that bleeds into every aspect of their professional lives, because we don't. This is hard. You can't kind of pretend otherwise, and without support, professionally and personally, it's almost impossible to make this kind of career work. And yeah, I don't really have a solution for that. I wish I did, but I guess I just hope people know that they can ask for help, and not, and you're not going to be met with, I mean, unless you are someone super mean, you're not going to be met with derision, and you're not going to be met with somebody saying, actually, like, bugger off, I'm not interested in helping you. You're most likely going to be met with empathy, and if you're not, then that says more about them than you. And it should be normal. It should be normal to say, like, I'm having a tough time with this, whatever this may be.
Perhaps that there's this desire in classical music to always, I mean, I don't know what it actually means, but to always be perfect all the time, or at least present in a way. So it's unrealistically demanding on individuals on and backstage. And you know what? I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, because in light of this ongoing pandemic, I really hope, as you say, that companies and institutions take this time to think about what they mean and what they can be moving forward. So coming out of all of your experience and your observations, and in a sense, having been an agent and continuing to be one, and I think the word agent is an important term being mixed into this, that being of, you know, having agency. Are you planning on doing something or developing something in response to all of your thoughts?
I think agents and artist managers have huge responsibilities always, but I think at the moment, particularly in light of everything that's going on in the world, there is an additional responsibility to work ethically and with the future in mind, which I think most artist managers are thinking about anyway, kind of in an everyday sense. But I think there's a real need right now to think about the longevity of the industry and how we're looking to the future, and ensuring that artists won't just be working next week and next month and next year, but 50 years in the future and 100 years down the track. And how are we ensuring the best possible outcome for our artists going forward, and for this industry as a whole going forward. And I think working in a really holistic way and looking at how does this artist fit into a broader sector that they belong to, and not just thinking about this particular soprano needs X, Y, and Z to get to this international house. So I guess thinking more laterally, thinking creatively, and being, I guess, very much a person of the international scene, not necessarily in the sense of this person has to be singing in Europe by 2024 or anything like that. But being, but thinking about the responsibility that we each individually have to the broader framework. I think that's become really apparent and important because of the pandemic and because of the way this kind of past year has made us think about what the future looks like for all of us, artist managers included. If there is no opera down the track, then there is no work for opera agents, etc. So I think what I'm really conscious of right now is setting something up where I can work with creatives and artists and presenters and producers in a really expansive, lateral way, and so I've been working on setting up my own space, I suppose. I'm nervous about calling it an agency because I don't think that's what I want it to be labelled as maybe 5 years down the track, but what I want to be doing right now and what the plan is for next year and the years to come is to provide a space for artists to work with me at building their careers, but also creating a space that is really a part of the fabric of the community, both here in Australia and internationally. And so I will be starting Steller, which is that space for me, in the next couple of months.
Oh my God, that's so super exciting. So, I mean, beyond all this, what is the gist of this inclusive space for classical music that will be Steller?
I think a lot of it has to do with where I am right now and coming off the back of the pandemic and moving back to Melbourne from London and feeling a real pull to do something meaningful with my time and with my energy, and really taking the learnings that were cut short but were still significant from my time in Europe and putting them into practice here in Australia, and also a real gratitude for a lot of people and artists that I work with or have worked with in the past here, and wanting to do something that really honours how I feel about artists and opera and classical music more generally. I would really like to create a space that is incredibly comfortable and special and accessible for people, for artists and for presenters, and I want to build it up on a real level of trust, that people can call me and we can have open conversations about what is working and what's not, and how I can help and how the people within my network can help, and looking, as I said, to a more holistic way of managing and planning and looking after people, and not I suppose looking after in the sense of looking down on or thinking that I am in some kind of like mother role, but instead looking after in a way that I think the whole industry needs to be doing more of. So we all need to be looking after each other right now. I really believe that, and the artists need to look after the people that they rely on, the coaches, the agents, the people that help them with costuming, and the people that work backstage. Like this has been an increasingly challenging time, and we're not at a point yet where we've figured out what the future looks like, even like neither the short-term future nor the long-term future. And so I think looking after one another is one of the most important things that we can do, and is one of the things that I feel as if I can hopefully offer to people, whether they are long-term artists with me or just people in the industry. I think we owe it to each other, and I feel as if it is a responsibility that I want to take on to nurture a practice, my own personal practice, that involves a real sense of looking after the sector and the artists. I feel extremely passionate. I know we've already spoken about this, but I feel very passionate about both the livelihoods of artists in Australia and elsewhere, and the long-term survival of the industry. And I think this is a really perfect opportunity for me to combine those two passions and make something really worthwhile. At least that is my great hope. So yeah, that's the next phase, I suppose. And I have no kind of greater plan than taking on a number of artists and really nurturing their careers and seeing where that leads down the track. And I'm really excited about it. I think there is a lot of possibility there.
And I'm so excited by it. Gosh, there's so much hope and energy coming from you that I can't wait to see everything that comes out of your work and, you know, all the things we've spoken about today, although I'm sure we'll continue to keep speaking. I just have to say a massive thank you to you for taking the time and having this super cool conversation with me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I love what you're doing on this podcast. I think it's an amazing platform, and yeah, I value it highly. I value the conversations you have, and it's a real honor to be part of that.
No, it's been my pleasure to talk with you, because you've seen so much of the behind the scenes and the very intricate ways about how opera works, and I haven't really seen that part of the world other than going to see an opera. So it's been really great learning more about it.
Oh, it's all well, right. I'll take you back next time, Vicky.
Yay! Yay! So once again, a massive thank you to Megan for joining me today. As usual, all the information about Megan's work, and do remember to keep an eye out for the launch of Steller in the coming months, will be popped below. Megan has also been super kind in putting together this expansive list of resources about the world of opera, critiques of opera, and the future of the art form of opera, which I've popped below and in the transcription for all of you to check out. I'd just like to take this moment to say thank you to all of you who are listening and who have been incredibly supportive throughout, the inception and presentation of this series over the past few months. The next episode will be our last one of 2020 before we head into the holiday season, so I'm looking forward to sharing that final 2020 conversation with you all next time. Catch you all then.